I found a monster in the woods. Every year, I spend a week in the woods alone. I cannot stand being inside my empty house on the anniversary of when I lost everything important in my life. The walls close in on me and I feel suffocated. So I go to the woods. I sleep, drink, and try to shoot at least one deer. On the second day of my trip, I was walking through the forest in damp weather, feeling miserable, when I came across it, a creature hanging by its foot from a tree. I panicked when I first saw the figure strung up in the tree and rushed forward, hoping if it was a person I could still help. As I got closer, I saw that even though its body was similar to a human, all the proportions looked wrong. The legs far too long and skinny, the stomach sunken in, rib cage visible, making it seem like it had no muscle mass or fat. I stopped below the creature, staring up at it in disbelief of what I was seeing. One foot was stuck inside a bear trap that was attached to a chain hooked over a branch. Its entire body was hanging from a torn and bloody ankle snared inside the trap. Wrists tied together and arms so long that they nearly touched the ground as they dangled past its head. The creature's face was covered by a blank wooden oval with moss spilling out from it. At first, I was certain it was dead. As I got closer, I saw the chest rise weakly as if it let out small wheezing breaths from under the mask. Even without seeing under the mask, I knew that this thing was not human. The woods had a bad reputation of people going missing. Most didn't like camping overnight in the forest anymore. It was a good place to fish and hunt, but not to stay the night. I had my hunting rifle with me. I could put it out of its misery, or just left it alone. Someone put this thing here. They might be back for it. Misty rain came down, and I could see puffs of my breath from the terrible weather. My feet cold and fingers stiff. It would get dark in a few hours. I should go back to my camp and get dry, or else I'd get sick, or leave this damn forest before any more of these creatures came for me. Instead, I did something that only an insane person would do. I placed my gear on the ground to climb the tree to get the creature down. It was the middle of the night when the creature stirred. I'd treated the wounds the best I could. Getting that bear trap off without cutting my hand took almost an hour to do. Dragging the lanky thing back to camp wore me out, and I still needed to dry the creature off and wrap up its wounds. The damn thing better appreciate what I did for it. While I waited for it to wake up, I sat by the fire, sitting under a tarp to keep dry. I let the monster I'd dried back use my tent, keeping the flap open so I could keep an eye on it. I was dead tired, but didn't want to fall asleep with whatever that thing was close by to eat me in my sleep. Its limbs were so long, I had to fold them to make sure that they would fit inside my small tent. At some point in the middle of the night, I heard movement in my tent. Slowly, a hand came out, long fingers testing the damp ground. I couldn't see the thing's expression because of the mask and moss covering its entire head. Even while it slept, I didn't dare look under the mask to see what it really looked like. I remained still, wrapped up in my spare blanket. If it attacked, I could shoot it, but I didn't even reach for my rifle. Half of the creature's body came out of the tent, body freezing up when it sensed me nearby. The next few seconds were tense. Neither of us moved, waiting for the other to act first. I'd hoped this would be a treat and release process, that when this creature woke up, it would just go back off into the woods. I was not so lucky. It made the choice to attack the easy target. Darting forward, it cleared the distance between us quickly. I was knocked over. The thing's bony hands pinned me to the ground. The mass flipped up so fast I never saw what was underneath. Sharp teeth grabbed a hold of my jacket and started to shake it, tearing the fabric but not reaching my skin. The attack didn't last very long. I was fully ready to accept my death at that moment. After all, I had nothing waiting for me outside the forest. If I could become food, at least my death would mean something. But this creature didn't even give me that. It stopped, releasing my coat and staggering back. Collapsing on its side, it let out ragged, wheezing breaths. It used up all its strength in that thin body. I watched it, wondering what to do next. I grabbed a blanket from my tent, trying to wrap it up to keep the creature warm. It weakly pushed my hands away, sharp claws catching my coat, but not tearing it. Wrapping the thing very much like a burrito, I went about getting it back inside the tent. I couldn't see the creature's expression, but I could sense how annoyed my new campmate was being manhandled and wrapped up. Until it regained some strength, it would need to accept some help. I went back outside, wrapped myself up in my own blanket again, and stared back into the weak fire. I planned on staying up all night, but I drifted between sleep until dawn came. Out of the trees, I heard sounds as if someone was walking around in the dark just beyond my camp. Fear fluttered in my stomach. I was out in the open, exhausted from the cold weather. I didn't mind death, but I was still afraid of what was stalking around in the night. When morning arrived, I looked around the camp to find someone or something had in fact been circling my camp. Muddy tracks and broken twigs gave me enough evidence of being watched. I wondered if it was more of those creatures wanting to grab the injured one inside the tent. At least I lived through one night so far. My new guest was out of the tent when I got back to camp. It was wrapped in a blanket, glaring at me from under the mask. I could feel the eyes on me, even if I couldn't see them. I needed to think of what to do next. I could just pack up and leave. I doubted these things would follow me into the city. It still wasn't healed up and wouldn't be able to protect itself if whoever hung it up came back. Trying to get the creature to eat, it had no interest in the hot dogs and marshmallows that I had brought. It was a little surreal seeing a lanky creature like it in the dim gray morning light. This thing wasn't human, and yet I was helping it for some reasons I didn't know. Aside from people, this thing might eat other meat. If I could shoot some game, maybe a good meal would help it gain some strength back. And maybe for all my trouble, I would be eaten in the end. Only time would tell how thankful this thing would be for all of the help. I didn't want to go off into the forest hunting alone. If another person came across my camp, I didn't want them to come across my monster. One of them would end up dead if that happened. I paced, trying to think of what to do. As if it could sense my train of thought, the lanky creature bundled the blanket, putting it inside the tent to stay dry. Then it climbed up on my back, lanky limbs wrapping around me. My skin crawled as it stood, with my back bent, trying to support the sudden weight change. I waited for the attack that never came. We just awkwardly stood there, waiting on each other to do something. I could go hunting if I carried the creature on my back. It would take longer than normal, but it could be done. Picking up my rifle and small pack, I started off into the trees, still really creeped out by the thing that I'd decided to help. At least it wasn't trying to eat me. I really needed to call the creature on my back something. Naming things was difficult. I went through at least 100 while sneaking through the woods, trying to pick up on any game tracks. I didn't know what it was besides not human. Skinwalker and Wendigo just didn't suit with what it was from I've heard about them. No legends or cryptid name felt right. Soon, I found myself not caring if I had a name of the species. I doubted humans even came across them often enough to give them a name. I was startled out of my thoughts when I came right up on a deer. A decent-sized buck that should have run before I even got this close. Holding my breath, I froze, hand on my rifle. Careful to make as little noise as possible, I raised my weapon to get my shot lined up. For a moment, I wondered, was what I was doing even right? This thing I was taking care of could be evil. The missing person cases was a hint towards that. Then again, it might just be part of nature. Killing a deer to feed the creature wouldn't be wrong if this is what would happen in the woods, even without me interfering. I shot twice for good measure. The buck fell to the ground with a grunt of surprise. The thing on my back dropped to the ground, moving like liquid. It sulked up towards the fallen creature, masked face darting around, as if expecting something was going to swoop in and take its food. While watching it eat, I decided on a name in the worst way possible. I've seen videos of what a fox sound like. Those nightmare screeches and sounds were the same kind that this creature made while it tore into the deer and ate. Because its back was turned to me, I never saw the face. Just the fact the mask was lifted so it could bite and tear off chunks of flesh. Fox felt like a suitable name for the monster I'd taken in. Fox, I said mostly to myself, trying the name out. The creature slightly turned at my voice, letting me see a human-looking mouth, but filled with bloody, sharp teeth. I think he liked the name. Fox ate through the entire deer with insane speed. Even after devouring through pounds of meat, he was still skinny enough for me to see his rib cage. It was a mystery of where he put it all. Gathering up the larger bones, he followed behind me back to camp. At least he could walk now. Although limping and trailing behind, he crawled mostly on all fours, even though he was holding bones in his hands. I led him to the river first, so he could get cleaned up in the cold water, and I refilled some of my bottles to boil later. When we arrived back at camp, Fox gnawed on a rib while reluctantly letting me look at his injured ankle. It healed so much, I knew he would be fine by tonight or tomorrow. Watching him chew through his bone stash, I wondered yet again what I was doing. Not only did I not leave him to die, I'd named him. There was something seriously wrong with me if I could get attached to a creature like this. You can eat me, you know, I told him, not knowing if he knew what I was saying. Fox looked over at my voice, but didn't pause in his gnawing. Bone under his moss blanket covering his face. Strangely enough, I wasn't scared of it. I'd already accepted my death for a while now. If he wanted to eat me next, I would almost welcome it. The rest of the day, I let him wander around camp, and I kept the fire going and took a few short naps to catch up on sleep. When night fell, the fear of death finally came to me. I was inside the tent while Fox stayed beside the fire. I'd heard noises from outside and carefully crawled out from my sleeping bag to try and see the source. It sounded like a few people walking just outside where the firelight could reach. Fox tensed up, looking ready to attack if needed. I found my rifle, taking it into my hand as silently as I could. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I could see faint forms similar to Fox moving around in the trees. There was more of whatever he was in the forest. I stood waiting for them to make a move, rifle pointed downward. I didn't want to shoot one if they only showed up to pick up the missing member of their pack. One was brave enough to poke its head right into the light. It was low to the ground, lanky elbows pointing up. It also had a blank wooden mask, but it had a mane of tangled branches covering the upper half of his body. For a second, I thought I spotted glowing eyes inside the heap of woods, staring daggers at me. Well, go on, I whispered to Fox, trying to encourage him to go and rejoin his group. Almost like cats, they got closer to each other on all fours, backs arched, studying and doing half a circle around each other. Other creatures appeared, watching the exchange, each having a mask of wood with some sort of pile of forest debris covering their face. Some stood on two legs, making them almost 8 feet tall. Others on all four, ready to swiftly run forward if startled. It looked like it was going well. Fox got closer to the other creature and reached out a clawed hand over as a gesture I didn't understand. In the blink of an eye, they both flew into a flurry of motion. Horrible hissing and garbling cries came from the tangled pair, thrashing, trying to kill each other. My heart sank, and a pit of black fear opened up my stomach. Fox healed up a bit since he was with me, but he wasn't strong enough to fight off the newcomer, let alone all the ones in the woods watching. I accepted I would die, but I was not able to let Fox die with me. I lifted my rifle and aimed it away from the fight. I fired it off into the woods, aiming at nothing. I hoped the sound would make them stop, and it worked. The one creature stopped to look around for the sound. Fox kicked the other aside and scrambled to me as I ran over and stood between him and this other pale form. The newcomer was covered in scratches, dripping in blood. Fox looked worse, his arm broken and countless cuts on his thin body from the brief fight. Getting between them, I received a fast, long cut to my arm, but it was nothing compared to what Fox went through. I pointed the rifle towards the monster on all fours, ready to fire if needed. It stared at me from behind that faceless mask. The other creatures didn't move. I heard Fox shuffling around behind me, but I didn't turn around to see what he was doing. When the other creature turned its head away from me to watch Fox, I finally did the same. He'd taken off the faceless wooden mask from his hood of moss and tossed it into the fire in front of all of us. The wood gave off a high-pitched shrieking sound as if it was an animal dying. Black flames shot up, spewing into the sky for a few seconds until the noise died down. The mask was burnt up completely. Fox sat next to the fire, nursing his bad arm. Slowly, the creatures around us started to leave one by one until the one that attacked Fox remained. It sat, dripping blood from its wounds. Finally, it too turned and left us, my arm bleeding and my rifle feeling heavy. Dropping my weapon, I collapsed to my knees. Caring about someone else was beyond stressful. White-hot pain started to come through my body from the cut. I found my arm was too heavy to move to see how deep the wound was. Trying to stand, my legs suddenly refused to work. Not knowing why, I fainted into a deep sleep. I didn't awake until it was morning. When I opened my eyes, I was inside my tent on my side, my arm out in front of me so I could see the wound was stuffed with moss. I felt hot and too weak to move or do anything at all. I couldn't even move my fingers. Pain came in waves as I tried to ignore it. Focusing on anything but the throbbing in my arm, I listened to the pattering of rain outside. The light was gray and impossible to tell what time it was. The tent flap opened, letting cool air and misty rain come inside the tent. Fox must have been the one to put me in here, but how did he know how zippers worked? My energy fading, I fell asleep again. The next few days, I knew I was dying. Whatever got into my cut was nasty, the creature easily being able to kill with one stroke of its claws. I slept most of the time, far too weak and feverish to move. Fox would keep me hydrated by lifting my head to let me drink from my still water bottle I had brought along, but the water tasted muddy. He was getting it from the river, not knowing to boil it. His efforts might just kill me faster. In my fever dreams, I was tormented by the truth that had haunted my every waking hour. The reason why I wanted death so badly, even though I was too much of a coward to do it myself. I wasn't there to hear the car accident, but was still plagued by the sounds. My mind repeated the sound of the officer knocking at my door at 4 a.m. to awkwardly tell me the news. His first time saying such tragic words to another person, and I knew it was my fault. 5 years ago, I cheated on my wife. A one-night fling. I did not have any good reason aside from I just felt like it. I told her, knowing I wouldn't be able to hide it. She very understandably got upset and left the house to her brother's place 4 blocks away. They both drank and insulted me, something I rightfully deserved. To this day, I don't know why they decided to drive back home that night. She was too drunk to drive, but her brother thought he was fine. It was only 4 blocks away from our home, and yet they got into a 3-car pileup from people leaving the bar for the night. Everyone in my wife's car died that night. Everyone else in the other cars were lucky enough to receive injuries that they could recover from. 3 people died: my wife, her brother, and our daughter in the back seat of the car. I went to sleep when she left and wasn't even aware she took our daughter to her brother's place with her. All because I made one decision to go home with a woman I thought was attractive. A whim killed 3 people. I needed to live with that fact for the rest of my life. Delirious from the fever, I could barely keep my eyes open. I saw Fox sitting next to me, his form blurry in my weak state. I couldn't handle falling back asleep and hearing my daughter was gone again. "Please, kill me," I begged him in a voice barely above a whisper. He didn't react for a long time. The longer I looked, the more I noticed he was slightly different. more human, his proportions not as lanky as before. He leaned in, and I saw instead of the moss covering his face, he replaced it with the torn up fabric that was once my clothing. He didn't keep it together with glue or thread. My tired brain wondered how the heaps of cloth stayed on his head. Reaching over, he took my arm, now red and infected from the cut. It caused a jolt of pain that almost knocked me out again to rattle my bones. Lifting my hand to his covered face, Fox lifted some of the rags to reveal a mouth of sharp teeth. Without any hesitation, he took my pinky finger off in one bite. I let out a soft scream, struggling to stay awake. Letting my hand drop, his long fingers came into view, moving directly to my throat. Darkness overtook me. I died. Fox choked the life out of me. Then he gave some back. It's something beyond anything I could ever understand of how it happened, and I don't think I ever need to fully understand it. I woke up, scar on my arm, feeling better than I had in years. Aside from being stiff, my illness left me. I was still inside my tent, rain softly hitting against the outside. Looking to my side, a bundle of blankets was taking up most of the space. Peeking under them, Fox was curled up. He moved from his nest, being disturbed, but didn't wake up. I left him alone, climbing out of the tent, trying to get the kinks out of my back. It was still damp, but I was glad to be in the cool air outside. A few minutes passed after I came out, and I took stock of everything. My pinky was still gone, but wound healed along with the cut on my arm. Aside from my clothing being torn apart by Fox, nothing else touched the camp while I was out of commission. I was wondering what I should do when a crunching of twigs drew my attention. A pair of men stood wearing raincoats over wet gear, both with rifles over their shoulders, unable to keep them dry. I thought I saw some chain poking out from one of their overpacked bags. Each seemed as if they were camping for a long time and worn down to the bone. "Can I help you with anything?" I asked, voice cracking from a dry throat. I knew who they were. Without a doubt, they trapped Fox and left him hung up in that tree to die. I wondered if I was going to run into the people who did such a thing and still didn't know how to react when it happened. "Have you seen anything strange at night?" one asked slowly while looking over my camp. I felt my hands start to shake and forced myself to keep them steady. "Nope, nothing. Terrible weather, don't you think? I'm going to pack up and leave today." I hope I sound casual enough. Glancing over, I saw Fox sitting up in the tent, moving around in the blanket pile silently. From the angle, only I was the one who could see him. The two men looked at each other as if trying to decide something. If Fox saw them, would he kill them? Would I let him after what they did? If we let them go back into the forest, these two would kill more of those creatures. I was sure of that. Whatever was in the woods, they hunted them down, and I found that I didn't care. I didn't save Fox because of what he is. I saved him to give myself a reason to keep going. He was special because I'd named him and made him special. They hurt him before he became that. If they left, I wouldn't go after them. But if they dared trying to harm Fox now, I wouldn't hesitate in killing them. Either they were too tired to deal with me, or I looked natural enough for them to believe my lie. "All right, take care of yourself. the older one said with a small wave of his hand. I watched as they left, still holding my breath. Fox poked out his head, covered in rags, directing me towards the Ben, who was already gone. It's still not too late to go after them. Fox gave them no notice. Do you want to go home? I asked him, not even sure if he could understand me. When I left the woods, I took something with me. A creature that almost looks human now. I sold my house and bought a very small cabin by the lake. I figured it would be better suited for Fox being around woods. He's never spoken to me, and I never seen what his face hides. There's still so much I don't know about the monster I carried out of the woods. The only thing I do know about him is he's now my reason to keep living. I never needed a good one. I just needed something.